hill outside the walls of Jerusalem stands bare and ugly under a sky that is turned black in the middle of the afternoon, and the air itself feels thick and wrong. The year is approximately 33 in the Common Era, and the Roman governor Pontius Pilate has just authorized the execution of a Jewish teacher from Galilee. 3 wooden crosses stand upright on this hill the locals call Golgotha, which comes from the Aramaic word for skull, because the rock formation looks like a human skull. On the middle cross hangs a man who has been beaten so severely that the ancient historian Josephus would later describe Roman flogging as a punishment that strips flesh down to the bone. The Roman philosopher Seneca once wrote that anyone facing crucifixion would plead to die before they ever mounted the cross, calling it the most wretched death imaginable. And yet the man on the middle cross has already spoken 4 times, and each time he has said something that stuns the crowd standing below him in the darkness. He forgave the soldiers who nailed him there. He promised paradise to a dying criminal. He placed his mother in the care of his closest friend, and he cried out to God. But there are still 3 more statements to come, and these final 3 words are the ones that almost nobody understands, because they contain a hidden sequence that changes everything. You have probably heard these words before, and you may have even memorized them, but today you are going to hear something inside them that you have never been told. The last 3 sayings of Jesus on the cross are recorded in the Gospels of John and Luke, and when you place them side by side, a pattern emerges that scholars have missed for centuries. The 5th saying is 2 words in Greek, the 6th saying is 1 word in Greek, and the 7th saying is a line stolen directly from a psalm that Jewish children prayed before bed. Before we look at what those 3 sayings actually mean, you need to understand something about what crucifixion does to a human body, because that context changes everything you are about to hear. In 1968, archaeologists in Jerusalem discovered the remains of a man named Jehohanan in a burial tomb at a site called Givat HaMivtar, just north of the old city walls. His right heel bone still had an iron nail driven through it, bent at the tip where it had struck a knot in the wood, and this is the only direct archaeological evidence of Roman crucifixion. That single nail tells us that the victim's feet were not placed neatly together like the paintings show, but were nailed sideways to the vertical beam with the knees bent outward. A crucified person could not breathe normally, because the weight of the body hanging from the arms compressed the chest cavity and slowly collapsed the diaphragm over a period of hours. Every breath required the victim to push upward against the nail in the feet, dragging torn flesh against rough wood, just to open the lungs enough for a single, shallow inhale. This means that every single word Jesus spoke from the cross cost him a physical agony that you and I cannot begin to imagine. And he chose to spend that agony on words that mattered. Now here is where the last 3 words begin, and the first of them is the shortest sentence Jesus ever spoke, and it sounds so simple that most people skip right past it. The Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 28, records it in Greek as a single word, and that word is dipso, spelled D-I-P-S-O, and it means simply this: I thirst. But John does not record this statement as a casual remark, because the verse says, Jesus spoke this word so that the scripture might be fulfilled, which changes the meaning entirely. The scripture John is pointing to is Psalm 69, verse 21, where the suffering psalmist writes that in his thirst they gave him vinegar to drink, a prophecy written centuries before. When the soldiers heard Jesus say, Dipso, they lifted a sponge soaked in sour wine on a branch of hyssop, and that detail matters more than you might think at first glance. Hyssop is the same plant God commanded the Israelites to use when they painted the blood of the Passover lamb on their doorframes the night before they escaped from Egypt in the Exodus. John is showing you something without saying it out loud, because the Passover lamb is being offered its final drink on a branch that carries the memory of the very first Passover. But here is what most people miss about this moment entirely, and it is the thing that makes this 5th saying so staggering when you understand it in its full context. This is the creator of water asking for a drink, and the Gospel of John wants you to feel the weight of that, because this is the same person who told the Samaritan woman at the well that anyone who drinks the water he gives will never thirst again. The one who promised living water to the world is now dying of thirst on a Roman cross, and the reason he says it out loud is not weakness, but theology declared through a parched throat. He is not merely suffering, he is fulfilling every ancient word that was ever written about this moment, and his thirst is the proof that the God of the universe chose to feel what you feel. Now we come to the sixth saying, and this is the one that most Christians think they understand, but almost everyone gets wrong, because a popular myth has replaced the actual meaning. The Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 30, records the Greek word Tetelestai, spelled Tetelestai, and every English Bible translates it the same way. It is finished. You have probably heard a pastor or a teacher say that Tetelestai was a word stamped on ancient receipts to mean paid in full, and that Jesus was declaring the debt of sin paid off. That story sounds powerful, and it has been repeated in thousands of sermons. But a professor at Biola University named Gary Manning recently proved that it is not actually true. Manning examined all 315 ancient tax receipts from a region in Egypt where this claim originated, and he found that the abbreviation on those receipts was not Tetelestai at all. The actual word written on those receipts was tetelonetai, a completely different Greek word that means taxes have been paid, and it comes from the word for tax collector, not the word for finish. Not a single ancient receipt, debt record, or financial document anywhere in the known world has ever been found with the word Tetelestai written on it, and this matters deeply. So if Tetelestai does not mean paid in full, then what did Jesus actually mean when he said it? And why does the answer matter more than the myth that replaced it for over 100 years? The word Tetelestai is in the perfect tense in Greek, which means the action was completed in the past, but its effects continue permanently into the present and the future without end. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus repeatedly says that he came to finish the work the Father gave him to do. And you can find this language in chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 17. In John chapter 17, verse 4, Jesus prays to the Father and says, "I have finished the work you gave me to do." And the Greek word he uses there is the closely related word teleo. So when Jesus says Tetelestai on the cross, he is not stamping a receipt, and he is not making a financial transaction with heaven, using accounting language from a tax office in Egypt. He is declaring that every prophecy has been fulfilled, every promise has been kept, every mission objective has been completed, and the work God sent him to do is permanently and irreversibly. This is not a whimper of defeat from a dying man, and this is not a sigh of relief that the pain is almost over. This is a shout of absolute triumph from the throat of someone who just won. And the fact that he said it with a loud voice, as both Matthew and Mark record, tells you that this was not a man slipping quietly into death, but a king making a royal declaration. Now hold that in your mind, because the seventh and final saying is about to change the way you understand the entire crucifixion, and it starts with something you learned as a child. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 46, records the last words Jesus ever spoke on earth. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and then he breathed his last breath. The Greek word for commit in this verse is paratithemi, spelled P-A-R-A-T-I-T-H-E-M-I, and it means to entrust something precious to someone you trust completely for safekeeping. It is the same word you would use if you handed your most valuable possession to your closest friend before leaving on a dangerous trip, knowing they would guard it with their own life. But here is the detail that very few pastors ever mention, and it is the detail that has brought scholars to tears when they finally see what Jesus was doing in this final moment on the cross. These words come directly from Psalm 31, verse 5, and in ancient Jewish tradition, this psalm was part of the bedtime prayer that Jewish parents taught their children to say every single night. The Hebrew word behind commit in Psalm 31 is pakad, spelled P-A-Q-A-D, and its root meaning is to entrust something to a watchful guardian who will keep it safe through the night. Every night before a Jewish child closed their eyes, they would say these words to God, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," and then they would fall asleep knowing they were safe. Jesus grew up in a one-room house in Nazareth, and like every Jewish boy of his time, his mother Miriam would have taught him this prayer before he fell asleep each night as a child. And now on the cross, at the end of everything, with his lungs failing and his blood draining, and the sky turned to darkness, he reaches back to the very first prayer he ever learned. He does not die screaming in terror, and he does not die cursing the people who killed him, and he does not die begging God for one more chance to escape this moment of agony. He dies the way a child falls asleep at night, whispering the same prayer his mother taught him, placing his spirit into the hands of a Father he has trusted since before the world began. And this is the hidden sequence that almost nobody sees, because when you place the last three sayings side by side, they follow an order that is deliberate and theologically staggering. The fifth saying, "I thirst," addresses the body, because it is a declaration of physical human need from the one who created the oceans and the rivers and every drop of water on earth. The sixth saying, "It is finished," addresses the mission, because it is a declaration that the work God sent him to accomplish has been completed permanently and will never need to be repeated. The seventh saying, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," addresses the soul, because it is a declaration of trust as he releases his spirit back into the care of the one who sent him. Body, then mission, then spirit. And that sequence is not random, because it mirrors the way a person who trusts God completely would walk through their own death without fear or despair. First, you acknowledge your humanity and your weakness. Then you declare that your purpose has been fulfilled, and then you place your soul into the hands of the one who gave you life. The ancient historian Phlegon of Tralles, who was not a Christian, recorded that during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, there was a total darkness from the 6th hour to the 9th hour at full moon. The historian Thales, writing around 52 in the Common Era, tried to explain this darkness as a solar eclipse, but the early church father Julius Africanus pointed out that an eclipse is impossible during a full moon at Passover. Something happened on that afternoon that even pagan historians felt the need to document, and it happened at the exact moment a man on a cross whispered a bedtime prayer and stopped breathing. Now here is why this matters for your life today, and it matters in a way that goes far beyond a history lesson, or a theology lecture, or a story you have heard 100 times in church. You have felt what Jesus felt in those final moments, not the physical crucifixion, but the emotional architecture underneath it, because every human being walks through the same 3 stages. There comes a moment in your life when your body fails you, when the diagnosis comes back wrong, when your strength gives out, and you realize you are fragile and finite and not in control. There comes a moment when you look back at your life and ask whether any of it mattered, whether the work you did and the sacrifices you made and the years you spent actually meant something. And there comes a moment, the hardest moment of all, when you have to let go and trust that someone bigger than you is holding you, even when you cannot see their hands or hear their voice. Jesus walked through all 3 of those moments in the span of 3 sentences, and he showed you the order in which to face them, because the order matters more than most people realize. He did not start with theology and end with pain, because he started with honesty about his humanity and ended with trust in his Father. And that is the pattern he left for every person who follows him. The religious leaders standing at the foot of that cross thought they were watching a defeated man die, but they were actually watching the most carefully orchestrated final act in the history of the world. Every word was chosen, every breath was spent on purpose, every syllable fulfilled a prophecy that had been written hundreds of years before any of those religious leaders were born. And the prayer he whispered at the end was not a prayer of desperation, because it was the same prayer he had been praying since he was a boy, sleeping on a mat in a house in Nazareth. He did not die as a victim, and he did not die as a criminal, and he did not die as a man whose plan had fallen apart beyond all hope of repair or rescue or redemption. He died as a son who finished his father's work and then came home, And that is the truth that the last 3 words of Jesus reveal when you finally hear them the way they were meant to be heard. So here is the question that only you can answer. And it is not a question for a church service or a Bible study group, but a question for the quiet of your own heart when nobody else is listening. When your moment comes, and it will come for every single one of us, which of these 3 prayers do you need to learn to pray first? The honest cry, the declaration of purpose, or the surrender? Here are 3 truths from this passage that you can carry with you starting today, and each one of them comes directly from the final breath of the man on the middle cross. The first truth is that honesty about your weakness is not a failure of faith, because Jesus himself said, "I thirst," and in doing so, he gave you permission to admit your need without shame. The second truth is that your life has a purpose, and that purpose can be completed, because the word Tetelestai means the work is finished in a way that lasts forever, permanently and irreversibly done. The third truth is that the safest place for your soul is in the hands of the Father, because Jesus trusted those hands enough to place his Spirit there with the same prayer he learned as a child. 3 sentences, 3 final breaths, and 1 hidden pattern that Jesus left on the cross for anyone brave enough to see it. And now that you have heard it, you cannot unhear it ever again.